something on our board here. So let's see if we can figure this out. Two ultimate attributes of God. If you were to boil down the two ultimate attributes. Okay, I heard holy and love. Okay, so there we are. So, holy and love. Now, if you notice, I put an equal sign here in the middle. Because they are equally ultimate. Unfortunately, that's not what we see today as the way people understand God. Right? Oh, pinochle, I don't have my right. No, that's all right. Just don't tell Kelly. All right, so not too bad. All right, so the way that is practiced in Christianity today is this, right? Less than?
Yeah.
Greater than? Remember the alligator?
Yeah.
Less than, greater. This is less than, greater. So holiness is less than love. In fact, so much so that it a lot of times cancels this out. So all we care about is God's love. Everything is love. Love, 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 love. We never consider His holiness. But these are equally ultimate. Okay? So let's keep that in mind as we proceed through this lesson, because this is really at the core of our lesson tonight, which is titled The Substitute Atonement. Yes?
In Scripture, I know that there's a word for Christian love, agape.
Right.
Is there a specific word that's used in the Scripture to describe God's love?
You mean as His attribute? Where it says God is love?
Love would be something that we're probably not as capable of. Like we have different kinds of love. Agape love, you love your wife. I don't know that love is anything we experience, right?
Yeah, in the essence of, see, what we need to be careful of here is the way the English uses love and the way that the Greek language and also the Hebrew. So there's a lot under the umbrella of the word love in our vernacular, whereas it's broken down into different words which we translate to love, but have different essences. So the one that best describes God's love for us is agape. But there's also this idea of brotherly love and affection and that kind of stuff. I would say that the way that the word eros is used is not indicative of love between God and man, unless you're like your Greek gods and things like that. So we totally reject that idea. So if you were to land on one in particular, it would be agape, yes. Yeah, and so, but I would say that there's some aspects of brotherly love and kindness. You'll see kindness, brotherly kindness, that is another word that is translated, that we just put under the umbrella of love in the English vernacular. So, so it's a little more nuanced. And so, but so the most, yeah, if there's a word that's even above all that, no. But that is an interesting thought. But it would be where it says God is love would be the idea of agape. It's a self-sacrificing love kind of a thing. So, good question. I thought you were going to ask if there were nuances to the word holiness. I thought that's where you're in the... but there's not. The word holiness is not as nuanced as love is. It's more cut and dry. Yep. Mm-hmm. So as we begin, we're going to keep this idea as the backdrop, and we're going to really flesh this out as we move forward, because this is at the heart of substitutionary atonement. So, the key problem for mankind is that we have been condemned by God to receive a penalty of eternal suffering. Okay, so as we read this, and you see this right here, what ultimate aspect of God's attribute is this focusing upon? His holiness, right? Because His holiness is the standard by which we fall short, right? And so, if that is the standard by which we fall short, then that is the standard of why we are sinful in measure. Because we don't measure up, right? So God's basic rule throughout history, sin is a willful violation of God's authority. Any sin committed makes a person guilty and deserving of punishment by God. Right? In the James chapter 2, verse 10, that whole section is talking about the progression of sin, isn't it? In the way that it comes to be. Right? Oh no, that's actually in chapter 1, but 2:10. Let's see what that says. Yeah, for whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in one point, he has been guilty of it all. The passage in James 1 actually talks about the process of sin, verses 14, 15, 16, in that area. So because of this, God's designated penalty then is death. Let's look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and see what it's discussing there. Yeah, this is pretty vivid. I think this, not too long ago, was in a Yep. Let's back up to 6. For after it all is only just for God to repay with affliction those who afflict you, and to give relief to all who are afflicted, and to us as well, when the Lord Jesus shall be revealed from heaven with His mighty angels in flaming fire. This is where these two verses here, 8 and 9, where we really get an understanding of what awaits. Dealing out retribution to those who do not know God and to those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. And these will pay the penalty of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of His power. That is one of, if not the most descriptive passages of Scripture detailing the penalty that we're due as a result of our own sin. But
when you read through these things, sin is a local violation of God's authority. Any sin committed makes a person guilty, deserving of punishment by God. Where did the sin, and I've heard it all my life,
yeah,
omission and commission, where, if we omit something, people call it a sin, but if we don't know it's been omitted in our life, how can that be sin?
What does it say? If you know to do good, you don't do it, it's sin.
Yeah,
Right.
but you know it. Yeah.
right.
It says if you know it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I think,
that's what I'm saying, but I know in the Methodist Church, I have heard that my whole life. That-
well, coming from that perspective, you can use the distinction of omission and commission. See, the distinction there would be is, it's not that you're doing something, it's that you're not doing something.
But you still know it.
Right.
But
They say that,
that if you don't know it, then it's not sin.
Right.
I mean, if you heard
But there is
this,
a verse that says,
have you heard that?
okay, well, here's the thing. Let's say that you're in the car having a wonderful discussion with the person in the passenger seat, and you fail to recognize that your 55 is now changed to a 35. And you go moving on through, as most people do right out here, and there happens to be a state policeman pulls you over and says, did you know that you were breaking the law? No, I had no idea. Yeah, you were in a 35. And you were doing 55. Well, I had no idea it was a 35. I wasn't even paying attention. Can he still give you a ticket? Because what's the statement? Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. Now, here's the thing. The person that's driving knows that if you do a 55 and a 35, you're going to get a ticket, get pulled over. Now, at the moment in time, were they realizing what they were doing? But they're still guilty. But they know, in essence, right from wrong. Are you with me?
Yeah, I think we're.
No, I'm not saying that they're not making that distinction. But they are. I'm saying how to shoot that down. So the idea of, if you want to say omission or commission, in the sense that they're using it, no. In the sense where Warren's bringing it up is, you can sin by not doing what you know you should be doing. It's not just punching somebody in the face.
Brian,
Yes.
isn't there something, I can't remember where it was, but there's something about God put like a moral compass in your heart?
Certainly.
And
Romans 1.
yeah, that's.
How is it possible in Romans 1 for it to say that there will be none that are without excuse? It's because, is it in Romans 2? Where it talks about that it's not written on tablets of stone, but written on their hearts. I believe that we, because of our nature as created, know right from wrong intuitively. And yes. Yeah, yes, even a child. I mean, that was one of the amazing things. I mean, that as we, brought Shalonda home and started seeing her, she, at that young age knew when she did something wrong. Well, maybe it was taught, but there were things that I know that we've never communicated that she knew not to do. And then the other flip side of that is she knew how to lie to cover up her mistakes. She knew how to preserve herself. Anyway, I believe that we have, as part of our being, as created in God's image, that we know right from wrong. See, here's an amazing thing, and I don't know why this never impressed upon me. It's amazing how things can really hit you. The law of Moses was written long after many thousands, millions, billions of people had lived. What standard were they held accountable? Did they have a law that was written? Before Moses, was there any kind of written? But doesn't it say that they knew evil and did practice evil? And, well, you can't know evil unless there's some standard of good. So they were held accountable. See, it would be ridiculous to hold someone accountable without them knowing that they were doing wrong, right? And so God had every right to hold them accountable, and we see this as a result of, if you want to understand this whole dynamic, read through Romans chapter 1. And so when you talk about sin and the penalty and the accountability and all these things. So every person, B. So then we have God's design penalty is death. And then therefore we have hell is a universal problem. See, here's something you could turn on someone. if you could say, if you believe in, if you have a universal perspective of eternity, well, yeah, I sure do. We all humans are universally destined for hell. Unless it's a universal problem. There is no one that is exempt from that problem. Every person who has reached an age of moral responsibility has chosen to sin against God. Okay, so this is where we get into the age of accountability. And so we've talked about those things about children. And so if something were to happen to a child prior to the age of accountability, what is their destiny? We know that the Catholic Church, as a result of their whole system of things, have a place just designed for them. It's not purgatory. It's something altogether different. So, but we don't hold any of that. We realize that as a result of this age of moral responsibility has not reached, and therefore they are still covered by grace at that point. So everybody else, though, that is of moral responsibility, that age, then they have a universal problem. Thereby, point 2, resulting in the whole human race being destined to hell. That's a difficult statement, isn't it? I mean, that's not one that you that you just feel great reading out loud. The whole human race is destined for hell.
Can you imagine Nelson at a workplace? Or how about on
The news?
CNN or... Wouldn't that get pushed back?
Absolutely. But, okay, Danny,
I don't like it either.
hold on. But what fundamental starting point, when even religious people, makes that an outlandish statement? Because all they think of, all they understand is this. You understand what I'm saying? If all their understanding is this, then there is no universal punishment. In fact, they flip it and say there's universal heaven for everyone because they overemphasize this attribute of God's. Now, these are religious people. These are some Christians that would say that, well, there's many roads, but everybody's on one, and it's their own. They're just figuring out their own way with their own truth. That's because they have this perspective. Now, on the other hand, if all you have is this, what do you end up with? What is your perspective going to be? Yeah. Yeah. What chance do I have? God is wrathful. He's just waiting to just hammer me, no matter what I do. They're both equally ultimate. And if you overemphasize one or the other, you end up in some weird places with your doctrine and the way that you relate to God. So we have to have these both at the top of the mountain. So, now, here's an interesting phrase. The key problem for God, we can stop right there. How does God have a problem? Well, hold on.
Acts 17:30 says that he has a problem.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, satisfy all the sacrifice.
There you go. And so this statement is the key problem for God is that He does not desire to inflict hell upon mankind. That is true. The Bible tells us that He desires that none should perish. Well, if that's the case, then we have a problem. There is a conflict. I like the way Dr. Cottrell puts it. He puts there's a tension that there is a struggle between these ultimate attributes only when confronted with something, though. See, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, prior to the fall, was there any issue? Was there any problem? There was no problem. If you want to use problem or if you want to use tension, Cawthron talks about it like a rubber band. That's being stretched as far as it possibly go. So, what is the problem, or what is the thing that causes the tension between these two ultimate equal attributes? Okay, so, sin, that is, so, these, when confronted with sin, now we have some major tension here between these two things, because God's righteousness demands that He act according to His holiness. God's righteousness demands that He act according to His love. So how then do these things resolve themselves? How does the tension, how is the problem solved? So God's nature of love and grace prompts Him to desire good things for those who bear His image, even when they have done wrong to Him. However, God cannot simply forgive and forget. That which He has promised to punish. Okay? So He couldn't just say, you're forgiven, and be done with it. Could He? He could, but there's a problem. Because of certain statements He has made. See, He could have designed a state of affairs where He could have said, you're forgiven and that's it. But that is not the state of affairs that He has designed, and therefore He declared. Once He declares that it's going to be a certain way, then it has to be a certain way. And then these things have to take place. Okay? So if He declared from the beginning that I speak, you're forgiven, and it's done, then that would have been our state of affairs. Yes?
Genesis would have been very short.
Yes.
And no need for
Yeah.
further.
Right. Yeah. But that is not the way that God chose to deal with the situation. He chose a much different way. A much more beautiful way. Amazing way. So He cannot simply forgive and forget. That's what He promised to punish. See, that the phrase there is promise to punish. God's holy nature will not allow Him to observe sin and do nothing about it. God's just nature will not allow Him to back down on His duty to punish sin. God's faithful nature will not allow Him to go back on His word. The problem for God, and notice this is in quotes, is how to do both of these, the things His nature desires. How can He punish sin with His eternal penalty and yet not hurt the sinners? How can He be both a righteous God and our Savior? How can He be both just and justifier? That's that verse, we see that terminology used in Romans chapter 3, verse 26, a great passage. So here we move into the key here. The key to both man's problem and God's problem is substitutionary atonement. So let's go back to this for just a moment. In the face of sin, God's holiness, what does it manifest in? Towards man. Punishment. What's a, you could say punishment. Death. Wrath. How about, you like wrath? I like wrath. So it causes within him wrath, doesn't it? So you could think of wrath kind of like lava beneath the surface. And then when it comes in contact with sin, it erupts instantaneously. Powerfully, devastating. That image, I think, really portrays the impact of God's holiness when confronted with sin manifests in wrath. If you think of the lava beneath the surface and comes in contact with sin, and therefore it erupts in wrath. It's kind of a violent, extreme thing to picture. Lava, its power and destructive nature, but that's a necessary understanding about what happens within God's nature. So now, love, when confronted with sin, manifests in what? Grace. See, grace is an expression of His love. It manifests. Let's ask this question. Without sin, is there a need for grace? So, prior to the fall, did grace in the way that we understand it exist? After the fall was necessary, right? So, the way these things work them to manifest ultimately are in these ideas of wrath and grace. So the key to both man's problem and God's problem is the substitutionary atonement. Atonement refers, now this is a little, you might have to read this through once or twice, but it's a little, the wording here is tricky. Refers to giving whatever penalty is required of you by God for the sin you have done. So atonement means that the penalty is required of you, that to giving whatever penalty is required of you by God for the sin you have done. So that is different than substitutionary atonement. In the Old Testament, they had a thing called the Day of Atonement. What were they doing there on the Day of Atonement? Right. Right. So on the Day of Atonement, what are they dealing with here? Right? Stay is a good word. Another term we use is roll back, roll forward. Substitutionary atonement refers to allowing someone else to pay your penalty for you. Sometimes referred to as vicarious atonement. Now, this is interesting. Vicarious is substitute. The root word there. And that's where they get this idea of the vicar of Christ. Don't you dare ever call me that. Or anyone else for that matter.
We wouldn't do that, right?
Or that. See, when you think of it, in those terms, to attach that title to yourself, Yes. No, I have not learned that. I have not learned that. Yeah. Yes, I know. But until Randy come along, I was the only one that could figure out Photoshop enough to do something. So now I got to be careful. All right. I still got that on my computer. So don't get any ideas. So sometimes referred to as vicarious atonement or sometimes referred to as penal substitution. In substitutionary atonement, the conflict within God's nature is fully satisfied. At the same time, God was able to satisfy His gracious nature and provide a way for sinners not to suffer God's penalty for sin. Now, I've got a challenge for you. If you want something fun to do, is there any other world religion that can do that? That can explain justice, wrath, and holiness versus love and grace? See, what we find out in most other religions is that one emphasizes one or the other, but they can't do both. Give that some thought. Because just on a basic surface knowledge, where would you say Islam falls on this spectrum? Right? And look what that has manifested in. Then you got these other ones that all they can really focus upon is love. And it manifests a different way, but it's still ultimately just as deadly. So the essence of Jesus' death at Calvary is that he was paying the penalty of external suffering that sinners owed to God in order to allow mankind to be exempt from suffering. Jesus bore the transgressions and iniquities of mankind and suffered God's penalty. Jesus bore the sins of mankind and suffered God's penalty. He became sin. That's at 2 Corinthians 5:21. We just talked about that a couple weeks ago. It's in that statement right after it says we are ambassadors for Christ. Be reconciled to God. And then it says he became sin who knew no sin, right? That's that passage. We just studied that recently. Beautiful, beautiful concept. Jesus took man's place under the curse of God's law and suffered God's penalty. Now, the following four things we're going to look at here, we're just going to look at them quickly, there are four prerequisites, okay, for someone that was going to be able to provide substitutionary atonement. Are you with me? There were these four things. There are others, but these are the four main ones. These prerequisites had to be in place for someone to be able to bring about this idea of substitutionary atonement. The first one is this: fully human. Now, why is fully human necessary? Why is this a prerequisite for substitutionary atonement? See, substitutionary atonement is the only way that these two things can work themselves out. So if fully human is one of those prerequisites, why did it have to be fully human?
You have to be sinless. You have to be sinless. So you have to be like us.
Okay. Okay. So actually, one of you're right, but yours is in one of the broader points. Completely sinless is one of the other main, one of the four. So you're definitely on the right track. But as far as human, what did you say? What were you saying? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So when we talk about, remember we talked about the incarnation being fully human, fully God. It was God's pleasure to require that the substitutionary atonement for the mankind for mankind to be fully human. Once God announced in prophetic word, here's the key phrase, okay? Once God announced in prophetic word that salvation would occur by the seed of the woman. Remember, we talked about this, Genesis 3:15. Anybody want to try the fancy term for it? No, remember we talked about there? There's that theologians have given that passage in Genesis 3 a name. I'll give you a chance. First prophecy. Is that the name they've given it? I mean, in essence, you're right. Proto.
Evangelism.
The first gospel is the way it's translated, but the fancy word they use is proto-evangelium. First gospel. Okay? So once that decree was made, and that was fairly, I'm sorry. Prototeoevangelien. Yeah?
I'll tell you. I'll tell you.
Barb will get you. Protoevangelien. Okay. So, once God announced in that prophetic word that salvation would occur by the seed of the woman, then the incarnation became a necessity for the Son of God if He wanted to save us from our sin. So, God's human requirement demanded nothing less than full humanity. We've been over this inside and out, right? I mean, when we talk about the incarnation and the necessity for fully human, this is what, but the reason that the incarnation, this is what this is playing out here, is because of substitutionary atonement. For this to be all reconciled, this was the state of affairs, so fully human, once it was decreed in prophetic word, was going to be a necessity for the Son of God if He wanted to save us from our sin. God's human requirement demanding nothing less than full humanity. God was apparently operating within the substitution principle of like for like, meaning apples to apples. Nothing less than human would suffice for a true atonement. Even divine nature alone, now listen to this, even divine nature alone would not satisfy God's condition once He announced seed of woman. Okay? Now, if you understand that comment there, then you know that then there is a major New Testament heresy that gets knocked right off the table by that statement. Yes, because Gnostics would say, sure, He's divine, but not flesh. So they denied flesh, they denied fully human, and so anytime you deny either aspect, fully God or fully human, you are both feet firmly planted in heresy. Yes.
But they don't firmly believe God.
The Gnostics?
Yeah, they don't believe that they're
I would say that's true. They would believe the soul or the spirit to be pure and immortal. Yeah, so everything that we witnessed was just an apparition or a ghost, that kind of thing. So this understanding knocks that completely off the table as even a possibility. So by God's will, the substitute must be fully comparable with those whom He intends to save. Interesting. Jesus fully satisfied the condition that He be human like us, 100%. See, it cannot be 99%. There cannot be anything less than fully. It has to be 100%. The biblical testimony confirms that He lived for 33 years on this earth entirely within the parameters of human experience. We've been over through this many ways. God's acceptance of His death indicates that He satisfied God's conditions for substitutionary atonement. See, if God's nature and His Word said that it had to be a certain way, then it has to be that way. And His acceptance of Jesus means that He fulfilled those requirements. It's a little bit of circular reasoning, but it's necessary because it makes complete sense. It has to be that way.
Does that mean that if Jesus lived here for 33 years, He laid up all of His heavenly
Yeah.
things?
His attributes.
Yeah, does that mean that we have the capabilities of living without sin? Is it built into us, since we're fully in and He was, that we have the capabilities?
See, you brought this up before, and but we discussed this. We actually discussed this a little bit, but that's a great question. And that's a, believe it or not, that's a huge, got its own kind of different camps that come onto that question in different ways. No, you did though. It was a great question. No, that's fine that you bring it up again, because this deals very much with, do we have the capacity to not sin, to be sinless? I would say in theory, yes. Here's why. Here's why. Because in theory, there are two ways to heaven. And so, in theory, it is theoretically possible to enter through the law gate by keeping the law completely. Yes. But we know from Scripture, as a result of, I believe, of being in a world that is cursed by sin, and the Bible tells us that we all sin, that eventually we will choose sin, freely choose it. So in theory, I would say yes. Now, here's where we have to be careful with that. There was a whole thing that came out of that called perfectionism, saying that once you became a Christian, see, here's the thing. This is where that gets all messed up. If you had the capacity and you didn't sin, you wouldn't need to become a Christian. But, what was his name? Wilson? Jay Wilson. There was a pretty big movement, even that kind of even took up some in the Restoration movement, that said that it is possible, once you become a Christian, to never sin again. To achieve a level of sinlessness where you do not sin.
I think there's some denominations that still believe that.
It's out there. I mean, I don't know if it's denominational, like, teaching, like, within certain, like, mainline denominations, but this fella started kind of a movement around that. It kind of tuckered out. Well, I mean, then you get into a whole other thing, so. Go ahead, Rob.
This is where it comes into the accountability, in that it's not even in theory you can live without sinning. That's the reason they go to heaven, because they haven't sinned. I mean, they're really, if 6 years guys, someone with 6 years without sinning.
Right.
That's why they're all, they kind of are entering by the law because they haven't sinned.
Well, that's a whole other subject called, that's a whole other subject. I don't know if we'll address it, but Crawford Talk calls that original grace.
So what started all this? Randy, did you hear him? You heard him, didn't you? Yeah. I heard him. Well, I heard him speak, and he said, "No, I asked you guys a question. Can you go 5 minutes?" And I've never seen 5 minutes. Can you go 5 minutes? And not seen? Of course, the answer would be yes.
Temptation.
He said, "If you can go 5, can you go 10 minutes?" Yes, you can. And that was his theory. He based that upon, you can go 10 minutes, you can go 20. You can go 20, you can go an hour, or a day, a year. And that's what he based that on. Huh? I'm telling you what he said.
Okay, Randy, then Beth. Go ahead, Randy. Beth, you go first. Ladies first.
It's kind of my philosophy that I think Christians tend to sin on the act of omission. We don't
More, when you get more mature. Now, the goal is always to move towards Christ-likeness and to become holy as I am holy. That's what he asks us to do. And so the way that I've always viewed this is kind of like, oh boy, this is going to be fun.
That's cheesy.
I always kind of viewed it like this. It was a bad week. Okay?
Which is the last sin?
So if this is holiness, and this is time, that's kind of the metaphor. Are there dips and low spots? But what's the general progression? Now, this is what I think it should be, but I think in Christianity as a whole, I think what we see is, like just a plateau with things. Unfortunately. But this is the goal. I guess that means I can't throw them in. So, the other things that we talk about, fully human, completely sinless. Sinless is necessary because that the blood that is offered had to be completely pure, innocent, and absolutely sinless. Hebrews 7:26 talks about that. Now, is it possible that someone could live a sinless life? Let's just say it was one individual that just lived a sinless life and laid down their life for someone else. I'm just saying, I'm bending the rules a little bit here, okay? Just bear with me, you'll see where I'm going with this. For that individual to die for someone, to save that in turn, would that in fact be enough for, what would be the efficacy, the extent of that individual, their ability to save someone else?
You can only be responsible for yourself. You can't.
Right. Yeah, okay. Let me rephrase, because I understand what you're answering, but that means that my question is not good. Let's say that, because it's pretty close, that Danny Kelly lived a perfect life, and he decided to lay down his life for Angie so that she could have salvation. Okay? Could then Daniil come along and say, I want some of that, I want to be saved by his blood as well, in theory? Would his blood be enough for...
No, he didn't die for her. He died for you.
So this is an interesting thought. It's something I had never considered. See, even if it was possible, which it's not.
Was Danny born a virgin?
Hold on. I'm just saying. No. Even if... Oh, boy. Okay, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that there's nothing exponential or divine about what's happening here. It's, even in theory, if it was possible, which it's not, it may only be good for one. There's certainly no way that it could save the entire human race. It would require fully divine. You understand?
Yes.
Okay. So, I'm not saying that it's possible, because we know that it's not possible. But if it was possible for a human to live a perfect life and say, I'm going to give my life as a substitute, take the punishment, I have innocent blood to offer for an individual, that's as far as it would go. It can never be for the whole human race, for all sins, for all time. It would just be that one thing. But Jesus, being fully divine, was able to cover all. So
that kind of gets into the willingness too, because he was only willing.
that is one of the four attributes here, is that he was totally willing.
To die for Angie.
Now the reason it had to be totally willing, someone that was totally willing of their own accord, was to satisfy two things. One, that it was decreed, and the other is free will. See, if he had no other choice, then his free will is compromised, then what? He's not fully human. So this was This even makes it more impactful that he willingly went to the cross.
You see the human side of it, he's praying.
That makes it even more like the total willingness of the individual. He was not coerced, forced, made to. He willingly laid down his life. No one take it from him.
That's like the sacrificing babies, you know, they had gods and sacrificed babies to cover their sins. That didn't work.
No. For a number of reasons. So anyway, so you got these four things, the last one being fully divine. We really hammered out fully God, fully divine, but God's deity requirement demanding nothing less than full deity. That's point B. In His infinite, eternal nature of Christ that allows Him to maintain our atonement with God forever. Not only was it able to cover all, but it's also time-wise. It's not something that's ever going to end. It's never going to run out. There's not like an atonement that it's the expiration date. So His infinite nature, His eternal nature, the fully divine, makes it covering all people for all time that choose to obey Him, that are under the gospel, that are under His blood. We know, and we can talk about a little bit more next week how that works with the Old Testament folks that were obedient as well as New Testament. And even in today, but it does not have an expiration date. Did I see a hand?
Yeah, so God basically gave Himself free will, in a way.
Well, He has free will, and so
He does?
God has free will, and we have free will because we are reflecting His nature in His image. Remember we talked about there's different ways that when it says we are created in His image, we have the ability for logic, we have the ability to create, we have volition, free will. Those are a reflection of His attributes that He has shared with us. See, there are some attributes that He shares with us, there's others that He does not share. He does not share omnipotence with us. That alone belongs to Him. But the things that when we say we're created in His image, one of those things indeed is free will. And so, if we were to compromise free will, then that compromises His nature. Both as deity and name. Which I'd like to know how Calvinistic get around that.
Some people get free will and his natural attributes confused. I think that's what she was getting at. It's his free will to not go against His word. You know what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying? He has free will, but He will not go against His holiness.
Yes.
That's an attribute. Some people get that mixed up. Free will. He has free will to be holy.
Talking about Jesus or God?
God.
It's when you talk about His nature,
He won't go against,
they're part of who
He won't
He.
go against His nature.
That's
But
right.
he-
That's
but he
His
has
right.
free will to if He wanted to. But it's not His nature. But he has free will.
See, you wrote. That's a whole other can of worms because.
But it's not in His nature to go against.
No, it's not in His nature. Yeah, we could talk about that one for a while, as a matter of fact, because that discussion is actually a very active discussion because there are some that say He could choose, and there are others that say He can't.
So you just say that's not can't change.
That's the idea of it immutable. It's the same today, tomorrow, forever. So, yeah, that's like I said, that opens up some really deep philosophical thought, believe it or not. Okay, so we need to wrap up. We've gone over our prayer time at the beginning, went over a little bit. That's okay. So, again, Jesus fully satisfied the condition of human, fully human. He satisfied the condition of completely sinless. He satisfied the condition of totally willing, and He satisfied the condition of fully divine. Those four things were the four conditions that were necessary for substitutionary atonement and for the other side of the board here to be reckoned. For those things to be for him to be just and the justifier. Next week, we're going to pick up with the death of Christ and all those different things. And there's a lot of aspects to this and then one of my favorite lessons coming up is the images of Calvary. The idea of sacrifice, redemption, reconciliation, and propitiation, they're all necessary and have equivalence to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the reasons that those were written, the reasons that the New Testament includes the ideas of sacrifice, propitiation, reconciliation, and redemption, those are all in there for the very same reasons that we have the gospel told in 4 ways by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And you'll see why. But we're going to come up, that's in a couple weeks. So next week we'll be talking about the death of Christ.